Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and yesterday I made a video about my opinion of ketogenic diets, and it always raises some interesting arguments, and I should probably make a couple different videos addressing those, because a ketogenic diet is not the same thing as a low-carb diet. It is possible to severely reduce your carbs, particularly as an obese person, without being on a ketogenic diet. A ketogenic diet is a very specific thing I was addressing. I was not talking about all low-carb diets, particularly for sedentary people. So please understand the difference. Now, one of the points that people raised was that, well, the government has given these advice and whatever, and Americans are continuing to get fatter and fatter. And I always find that to be really an interesting point that people make, because how many fat people do you know who have been following government recommendations for food intake for the past 5 years? They don't follow them. What you generally see for the government's general recommendation for food intake and what they teach in the food pyramid and things is whole grains, fruits, vegetables, all of that stuff at the top. And it's generally a high carb, moderate protein, low fat diet that is very high in fiber. That is actually a proven method for people who do not want to track calories, which isn't the best of courses of action if you actually want to properly regulate your body weight. But if you don't want to track calories, that is a very reasonable approach to take, because you're still going to gain less fat than you would on most other types of diets. What most Americans follow who are obese is not high carb, high fiber, low fat. It is high carb, low fiber, high fat. The overwhelming majority of Americans eat far more fat, both in terms of saturated fat as well as vegetable oils, than what's recommended. Their amount of refined carbs and refined sugars that they eat is way, way higher than government recommendations. And I would suggest that these sort of things in combination are what fuels the obesity epidemic. In combination with not exercising enough. The majority of people don't exercise regularly. They don't lift weights, they don't jog, they don't partake in regular daily exercise or physical training. In case in point, you want to see what's fueling the obesity epidemic. Let's say again, you go back to those government guidelines, which is still a heavily grain-based diet, which is fine, because high fiber is satiating. High fiber actually helps with insulin resistance. And your two biggest culprits outside of obesity itself for insulin resistance are large amounts of refined fructose and large amounts of saturated fat. Well, those are the two things that Americans eat in large quantities. And I'm not saying either one of those in moderation will hurt you. They won't. It's excess, and excess is our problem. When we have those two combined, you go look at what a typical American might go eat at a meal for lunch. It's not uncommon if you go to McDonald's, look at the average McDonald's meal. You have a hamburger, possibly even a cheeseburger. On white bread, it's probably got some vegetables and things in there, which is good. So you've got right there, you've got a very low fiber grain. You've got white bread, it's going to be refined carbs, so it's not going to be as satiating. A large amount of saturated fat right there in the form of red meat and possibly cheese. Combined right there together. They're oftentimes, for the drink, they're going to have a soda, which is, if it's not a diet soda, it's pure refined high fructose corn syrup. That is virtually all the calories in it. So again, a very high fructose source of carbs that is probably more than you should be taking in, but it's again in combination with no fiber. And then they might have some French fries with that on top of it, which is a starch, a potato, which would be perfectly fine. It's very low fat, very high satiation. It's a very micronutrient dense food naturally. But then we fry it in vegetable oil, so then again we take a damaged N6 fat that could possibly in some cases be a trans fat, and then we just combine that all in. So we take a perfectly good starch and then we deep fry it to throw that into the mix, and you call that a meal. Well, if people are eating that every day, if they are not tracking their calories, if they're not active, then there is a good possibility they're going to be gaining body fat. And they have all the necessary components right there in that meal for insulin resistance. You have a very high caloric density. You have a lot of saturated fat. You have a lot of very refined, low fiber carb sources, and possibly even a trans fat, all mixed into one meal. That is your recipe for disaster. And we have the same issue with ignorance and poverty, because people who are poor don't know a lot about nutrition. They are on a tight budget, and they go buy their kids tons of the cheap grape cola or orange cola at Walmart because it's really, really cheap for that giant 2 or 3 liter bottle. If they don't have a lot of time to cook proper meals for their children growing up, they're going to get a lot of microwave pizza. They're going to get a lot of highly refined foods that are high in low fiber carbs and high in fat, and particularly saturated fat, all mixed into one meal. And this sort of thing is why we have an obesity epidemic. And it's not just one factor, it's all these compounding factors together. And it certainly has nothing to do with the food pyramid or government recommendations, because hardly anybody is following those recommendations. And clearly not the obese demographic of the population. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go.